To our next speaker, who is Lukie Tolhurst of Lucid Insight Ltd. So Lukie is working very closely with the Biorenewables Development Centre, some of whom are also here today, in the CHC X3 project, as is the University of York, and obviously in Peter. And Lukie's presentation is on exploring value chains and case studies from carbon capture biorenewable crops. Lukie.
I'll put that down there. Put it there. Can't go far without my tea. So yeah, I want to share some learnings today from having worked on various biorenewable crops to products in the biorenewable space. So that's materials, biochemicals, and other natural products. And also these crops which are really good at capturing carbon, whether that's into the plant material itself or into the soil underground. And it's a story of two halves. I'm going to start with a piece of work that I did last year that was looking at high value biorenewables crops that we can grow in the UK. And then I'm going to build, and Peter has set me up beautifully for this, I'm going to build on that whole concept around different ways of thinking about the value chain and different frameworks that can help you do that. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Okay. So if we start with the high value biorenewables piece of work. So it was called UK Grown, and it was about what we can grow in the UK that can be converted into high value products. And really, I'm not going to go into loads of detail what's in there, but that report is available on the high value biorenewables website. And if you go into the news section, you'll be able to find that report. But it does give quite a lot of information about a whole range of different crops. You can see the tops of some of the tables from it in here. So lots of different crops, and we looked at both mainstream crops that are already out there, but also some of these emerging and niche crops and the different applications that they either do have currently or could have. So we really looked from some of the kind of fundamental research ideas all the way through to some things which are already on the market and available. So just some examples of some of the different tables that are in there that summarize the crops and what their applications can be. We included fungi in this study as well. And some of the key areas, markets that were highlighted from that review was relating to the agricultural transition, so the whole change in subsidies, the move towards elms. There's a number of opportunities around some of these emerging niche crops which give some of those added value around environmental value. There was a whole area around medical and bioactive compounds from some of these crops. Another area was around plant-based alternatives to animals. So, for example, the way that the cosmetics industry has bought into squalane, which was extracted from shark's liver, but now can be derived from olive oil and amaranth and another crop, which I can't bring to mind now. And so we're talking about this on a kind of, there's examples that are global, there's examples which are local, but also how we're developing varieties in the UK to start to be able to grow these crops in the UK that maybe we couldn't really do more viably in the past. And then the fourth area was the antioxidants, colorants, flavors and fragrances sector. So again, different crops examples in that report where that's being looked at. And here's an example of a crop. I was told not to put too much hemp in this report, in this particular talk, because we know we'll cover it later. So here's another example. This is a new company. This actually isn't in the report because it was all published after the report was out. But they've got patents. And so Climate Fibre are looking at sunflower and valorizing sunflower around a number of products. So from the pigments, yellow, through to different purples, through to fibres, natural fibres, and they're taking the wax to make a waterproof coating for textiles as well. So it's a really cool company that's emerging, looking at sunflowers, and simultaneously there's quite a lot of work going on in the UK to develop varieties that will grow more effectively in the UK, because at the minute there are some problems with that side of things. And I thought one of the really interesting conclusions out of this report was the real focus on diversity, and it really highlighted how more diversity in our farming system can help solve a number of problems. So it's like a win-win. And I think that's one of the kind of themes, hopefully, that will emerge today, that more diversity in cropping, more opportunities can help build a more robust business, but also can help with things like building soil health, managing pest and disease. So it's trying to find those kind of wins financially, and these other values, which Peter has kind of been talking to earlier. So again, just some pretty pictures of some of the plants which we looked at in this review. Quite a lot coming out around specialist oils, and I think there's a talk later on that this afternoon. Legumes and all the protein stuff, although actually proteins weren't covered so much in the report, but still they're an important category coming out. These materials crops and some really cool grain crops coming up as well. And then for more native species, obviously there's some crossover between those two categories, but a really cool project in the fens around growing in wetlands and on peat. And how do we do that and still improve the peatlands, not damage the peatlands? That is a question mark. But some of these polyculture, as it's called, crops, and what we can do with those. Again, some oils. The watercress that's quite cool. That's got a urease inhibitor in it, which can prevent breakdown into ammonia and release of ammonia. Quite an interesting thing. Various dyes and all sorts of different cool stuff. So just to give a tangible example, this is a commercial example. This is an extraction company that sells oils into businesses. So they sell into loads of different businesses, these specialist oils, from food products to cosmetics to nutraceuticals, animal nutrition, yada yada. And they are actually a Netherlands company, but they've got this extraction facility in the UK, and they have these contracts with growers for different specialist oils. And this might come out later. The only thing to be careful of here is that the market and the demand and the supply kind of grow at the same speed, so that, because some of these markets can be quite volatile in terms of supply and demand. So being really clued up with what demand there is, and that you're not going to change the market through growing too much. And then on a consumer sales example, so this is a retailer. This is actually in Suffolk at Cambridge, Hodford, it's East Anglia anyway. And they are a shop that's specialising in British grown grains and legumes. And you can see the range. I mean, I think most people probably don't realise that these crops are even grown in the UK, but these British chickpeas, different lentils, quinoa or quinoa, hemp seeds, all being sold through this outlet. And I think more and more you can see these in some broader shops as well. And Farmers Weekly 2023, when they were looking at niche crops, doing a review, for example, they pulled out quinoa as one that has a good price and can be a good viable option. So that's that piece of work and some examples there. And I just want to spend the rest of the talk around some of those frameworks on how to think about value chain. So going back to Peter's lovely model of what is the value chain and what are those elements to consider. I am going to talk about hemp now. So just looking very quickly at the hemp fibre supply chain. So we've got the seeds, and that's seed development through to seed supply, the growing, the priming, processing into the kind of hard woody elements, the fibres, and then you get a load of dust. And then the secondary processing into the different products which you can make the use of those products in various markets, and the end of life and that next life. And at each stage, you obviously have your inputs and you have your outputs. And I guess a lot of the kind of historic value chain stuff would have looked at, and today as well, would look very much at efficiency and flows of material through that, because if the material can't move through that process effectively, then you're going to lose value. And at each stage, what you're trying to do in a traditional view of a value chain is, as Peter said, you're trying to add value to the consumer or to your customer at each of those steps, so that when you come to sell it, you're going to make some money. And you're also going to try and be cutting costs at each of those stages so that you make as much money as possible. There's your margin, your profit. But I think the other thing to consider as well, and this might be a bit of a kind of here, but is these other aspects of value. So there's two other ways that occur to me to look at this. One is actually, this might be a big leap, but bear with me, might be actually personal value. Like if you're going to go into some of these emerging crops or niche crops, are you somebody that's going to really thrive on dealing with whatever it is, the learning, the innovation, the new connections you're going to have to make? And what does that bring to you on a personal level to be able to handle that? Or is it just going to distract you massively from your core business and your other activities and actually end up devaluing what you're doing? So it really, I think there is an element of what does it bring to the people in the business, to yourself as the business head or whatever you are, and whether you want to bring that value into it, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. And then on a maybe a more tangible level would be at an organization level. Again, if you start, and I think Peter did sort of touch on this earlier, it might be that you're not going to make loads of money on this, but it might be that you make a whole load of new connections, which then can help you move into a different area or build it, or get you some experiences, which mean that eventually you will be able to make money. So it's that kind of longer term, bigger picture, rather than just necessarily immediately chasing a profit on something. Having said all that, again, as Peter mentioned earlier, you do need to deliver against the customer wants. And this is a big part of what most people would start to look at in terms of delivering value. And the way I was kind of taught this when I was in my old job, innovation, was the three different areas: one around price position, so affordability, one about accessibility and how you get to your customers. Can you get to new customers? Can you reach into new geographies? And around then the actual attributes of what you're selling and what value you're delivering to your customers on that. And that absolutely is fundamental to developing a business. And then just another area that seems to have changed, I guess, over time since I started 25 years ago on looking at value chains, is that there's been a massive emphasis on efficiency and cutting those costs and streamlining businesses. But as we've had all these shocks to the system around the pandemic and wars and political issues and all the rest, we know that now supply chains are really suffering with that. And so Deloitte helpfully did this model last year that said that there needs to be a new paradigm that really also focuses very much on resilience and agility. And I know agility has been talked about a lot over the years, but actually I think most of the agility focus has been focused on improving efficiency through agility rather than actual true adaptability. So the new there is a paradigm shift that needs to happen when thinking about value chains, because traditionally it's been very much around the money. And now really we're being asked to think more about being able to cope under shocks and pressures, and deal with environment and social issues as well. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So some questions to help think around creating value across value chains. The waste is really about efficiency. So the more traditional things, how can you make the most and avoid of what you've got and avoid waste? Flexibility is around the agility and resilience side of things. Flows and connections is about that, how your materials move through the supply chain and where the blocks and challenges to that. And also a lot around information flows that can be super important in terms of if you're not getting the right information at the right time, then you can't make good decisions to make sure those resources flow through the system. The wants, so back to that point, delivering against the customer wants, of course, but also is it delivering against your wants, and is it delivering against the organization wants? And actually an example of that with cropping is you may not make a huge margin, like the I can't remember the example Lydia gave earlier, but there was an example earlier where maybe it's not an actual crop where you're making money so much, but you know you're delivering soil health, you know you're delivering other benefits where it's actually going to save you money down the line. And then actually the biggest question is your overall goal. What is the value chain working towards? Is it actually going to help you with your overall goal? And is your goal actually what you want it to be, what you really want it to be? What are the values of the goal? Just a couple more slides. I just want to talk about a couple of frameworks that are helping people to think more around this broader aspects of what value actually is. And one of them is the donut economics. How many people have come across donut economics? A little bit. So this is a model that was developed in Oxford University by Kate Raworth, and it's a way of looking at the whole picture a bit more holistically. So instead of just thinking environment, social, what do we actually mean by that? And so they've actually plotted out the different key aspects, and these are developed around the Sustainable Development Goals. And I can't remember actually where they got the environmental ones from, but they're from a proper piece of work. So basically what we're trying to do is, if you want to live in the donut is where you can meet people's needs and live within the planetary boundaries. So if you're in the dark green, you're within the planetary boundaries, and if you're in the dark green here, you are meeting people's needs. And that can be on a really personal level, it can be an organisation level, it can be an industry level, it can be a geographic level. You can look at this in lots of different ways. And you can basically just start to ask or map out where you are sitting in that donut or not in the donut. Maybe you're not meeting any of these needs. And I think what I'm seeing is so many examples of where organizations are kind of consciously trying to look at that almost first and then work out the finances afterwards, like how do we make this financially viable? And then finding that that is working really well for them. And just to show that there is another, this is coming from different directions as well, is this is the global farm metric, which is really similar, except they didn't do it donut. They just kept it a bit more simple. And you can see on here, you've got all the environmental stuff like soil and water, nature, but also the social stuff of community, governance, farmers and workers, economics, other. So it's kind of this holistic view, and you can use these to qualitatively, you can qualitatively map where things sit on this. So, well, this is for hemp construction. I've done this off the top of my head, so sorry about the hemp people in here that feel like this is not right, because I want to do this with you. This is just me to demonstrate. But you can start to map out where you're adding value. This is where your industry or your product is adding value, and you can put in challenges. So the red ones are where there's maybe challenges or things still to be addressed. But you could do this quantitatively as well by converting this into a bar chart, for example, that gets particular metrics to measure how you're doing. And you can use that to communicate to your customers so that they then realize the value you're adding. And I just want to finish on an example of where I think someone's doing a real win-win job, which is this Wild Farm group. They are doing contracts with farmers to work under contract to grow wheat, and they have certain standards. And again, the diversity piece really comes up here. They want cereals growing alongside companion crops. They want to use cover crops to minimize their soil. They're integrating livestock, and those farmers grow under those standards, and they're part of a community, and they're sharing knowledge, and they're learning off each other. There's a toolkit, and they're seeing other benefits around insect biodiversity, the nutritional content of the wheat, carbon negative flour, and they seem to be making money as well. Thank you very much.
One quick question for Lukie, if there's any quick questions. Yes.
Yeah, just one observation really. Struck me that you were giving an example of the growing of quinoa.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering about the social impact of that in the sense of taking away a means of peasant farming in Southern America.
Yes, that has actually occurred to me as well. It's not a crop that I have looked at in detail in terms of the social impact abroad and growing it here and balancing out the kind of social impact and the environmental impact. This is why actually you could use the donut or something, one of those frameworks, to actually really map out both aspects and really see where that sort of positive value, negative value or negative impact lies. Not an exercise I've had a chance to do, unfortunately, but I absolutely agree there's a real issue with that potentially.
Thank you, Lukie.